Take a breath, step outside. Welcome. Indigenous Ways acknowledges the traditional owners of country throughout Turtle Island and pays respects to elders past and present. We want to take this time to acknowledge traditional owners and ancestors of these lands we reside on here in Santa Fe, New Mexico, the Pueblo people. And wherever you're beaming in from at this moment, the traditional owners and ancestors of your lands, so we could all be here at this moment. Thank you so much for tuning in. Whether you are live in our multiple social media platforms or watching this recording. During the months of June and July, Indigenous Ways is taking a sabbatical from our live shows. We look forward to coming back early August with a wonderful array of presenters, so please stay tuned. On our website, IndigenousWays.org, we have over 100 Indigenous, Native American, LGBTQAI2+, deaf and hard of hearing presenters. We started the Indigenous Ways Virtual Events on April 1st, 2020, so we could all stay connected. We're excited to show two presenters, one from the Wisdom Circle, Lakota Elder Joseph Marshall III, and also Elder Kathy Sanchez from San Ildefonso Pueblo, who presented recently in the Indigenous Healing Festival we had this past May. Joseph Marshall III is a living legend he will share his stories from his childhood along with some storytelling. Joseph is an accomplished author and continues to share his wisdom and knowledge with his people and all others that are interested in the truth. He continues to keep connection with his people alive through his writing and going back to his homelands. So please enjoy Joseph Marshall III. Let's give it up for Joseph.
As Tosh said, my name is Joseph. Joe will do just fine. I was born on a Rosebud Reservation, and I really personally hate to say that is in the state of South Dakota, but South Dakota did become a state in 1889, but the Rosebud Reservation was established in 1881. So we sort of predate the state of South Dakota as far as, the European timeline goes. But my people, the Sichanhu Lakota, or the burnt thigh people, and all the other Lakota people have been around for a long, long time, hundreds, if not thousands of years. So that's sort of generally who I am culturally. I grew up there on the northern part of the reservation. And fortunately for me, I was given to my maternal grandparents. My mother allowed my maternal grandparents, her parents, to take me when I was less than a year old, and they raised me as their own. So for a long, long time, I thought I was their child. And I was somewhat confused when my mother came around to visit, or my father, both of them came around to visit. As a young child, you can imagine, was kind of confusing as to who they were, because as much as my grandparents tried to correct me when I called them Ina and Ate, or mom and dad, and they corrected me to calling them grandma and grandpa, I still didn't understand what the situation was, which is fine. I mean, it wasn't a big problem in the end. Then later on, I found out what the circumstances were. But fortunately, as I said, I grew up with them, and for that reason, I learned Lakota as a first language, because that's all they spoke in their home. And most of the adults that came, most of the Native adults that came were Lakota, and of course that was the language back in the 40s and 50s. That was a predominant language. Most people still spoke it then, back in that day. So that's all I heard. I did hear a few words of English from my mother's younger brother, my uncle. My mother now is 92, and my uncle is now 90. But he was in high school, and he would come home to visit. He was at a boarding school. So he was my first teacher of English, because he would say names and phrases in English, and that's how I got started to learn English. And it really didn't matter to me, because my world was my grandparents and that place, which was about 150 square miles along the Little White River in northern, on the northern tier of the reservation. And that's where I grew up. That's where I played. My companions were dogs and a couple horses, and occasionally a snarky badger and whatever else happened to show up. But growing up that way was a blessing in many, many ways, not just linguistically, but as far as developing a cultural base. The people who were elders, who were my grandparents' contemporaries, were their friends and relatives. And all of them, or most of them, were in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, and even older, believe it or not. And all of them spoke Lakota. All of them were knowledgeable about culture, obviously, and certainly about history, and certainly about, what life was like before the Lakota moved up into what is now South Dakota in 1877. My grandparents, keep in mind that their parents, my grandmother was born in 1900, my grandfather was born in 1888, for example. Or at least he thinks it was 1888, because that was the day before birth certificates. So I think that was more or less a guess. So my point is, their parents were born in the 1860s and 1850, late 1850s. So that generation, their parents, my great-grandparents, had more of a direct connection to what was going on in those tumultuous years during and after the so-called Indian Wars. So they were, for me, a direct link to my own history, personally and culturally. So it was a blessing on several levels. And perhaps one of the most fortunate aspects of growing up that way was everybody was always willing to teach me something, or tell me a story, or have a conversation with a little boy. And sometimes in a lot of gatherings, I would be the only child or just one of a very few. So it was like being a captive audience. And the two regrets that I have is that I didn't have the kind of recording devices we obviously have now. So what I remember comes from memory. And the other regret is that it was over much too quickly. Eventually, I had to go away to school. Eventually, the outside world came crashing in, so to speak. I had to learn English. I had to contend with whatever was going on with that outside world. But the fortunate part for me was that what I learned from my grandparents and their generation was a basis for a strong sense of identity. I went into the world knowing exactly who I am and who I was at that point in my life. I am a Lakota, I was a Lakota, and that was the most important thing to me. And so that's the basis that I come from. Geographically, I'm a Sicangu Lakota. Culturally, I'm a Sicangu Lakota, or in modern terms, that's Rosebud Sioux, which I don't like. But if you're more familiar with that, then that is an identifier for that's more common. I was told that that sort of the theme for this evening was rise and resilience, which is appropriate, I think, for what we as certainly as a country, certainly as different indigenous groups, and as a society and as a nation, and as a world, have been going through for nearly a year now. For me, that's sort of hard to believe that this illness, this coronavirus, has been around for that long. At the beginning of when it's before I knew that it was here, and I hadn't heard anything in the news, I made a trip to Minneapolis, Minnesota, actually St. Paul, Minnesota. I flew up there one day, talked to groups of kids at 2 alternative schools for Native kids, and then an evening presentation at the University of Minnesota, and then I flew home the next day. And then once I was back, then of course the news started filtering in that there was this virus that had come from China, and it had a potential to be very deadly, and that was quite an understatement, as we all know now. So if we're going to talk about rising, if we're going to talk about resilience, then it certainly is appropriate in these times. And I'm sort of taken back to stories of the 1918 Spanish flu epidemic. And I know about it because my maternal grandmother's younger sister died of that illness when she was only 16. And my grandmother told me about her sister and about how ill she was and when she died and how hard she tried to take care of her. She did take care of her, and I'm sure she took care of her really well. But she told me that illness was something that was worldwide. It was happening all over the world. And it certainly happened in our part of the world up on the Northern Plains. And for me, the story was very personal because my great grandmother Emma, who lived to be only 16, died a few months after she contracted the illness. And my grandmother's stories about her sister were obviously beyond, had much more to do with than just her being ill in that epidemic. They were very close. Of course, they grew up together, and you know, they took care of one another. And when my great grandmother Emma fell ill, my grandmother was the main one who took care of her. And the aspect of that story that gets to me even today, even thinking about it right now, is that my grandmother, whose name is Annie, would cry, would weep every time she told a story. It didn't matter if she told it when I was 5, 6, 7, or 8, or she brought it up again in the late 80s, 1980s, before she died in 1984. Whenever she told a story, she wept every time. So in that sense, that story is very personal. An interesting sidelight here is that my grandmother's Emma, her given name by her family was Fanny. My grandmother Annie's given name by her family was Nellie, and those were the only names each one of them had. So it was Fanny Good Voice Eagle and Nellie Good Voice Eagle. And when their father and stepfather died, their mother inherited a lot of land. And eventually that land was inherited by my maternal grandmother. But when that transaction was taking place, the transference of ownership of that land to my grandmothers, when they were 16 and 18, they went to the Bureau of Indian Affairs agency, and they had to sign documents. The Indian agent, who was a white man, explained to them what was going on legally so they would understand they were inheriting a lot of land. For whatever reason, known only to this man, the BIA agent, decided to give them different names. So my grandmother Annie became Emma. So that was the name he entered on the title deed to the land, Emma Fanny Good Voice Eagle. And for my grandmother Nellie, he gave her the name Annie. So she was thereafter known as Annie Nellie Good Voice Eagle, because their father's name was Good Voice Eagle. So since those documents were legal, that from that moment on were their legal names. So thereafter, people knew them as either Emma or Nellie. So a lot of my grandmother's old friends that she had grown up with and known her since childhood and afterwards knew her as Nellie. And I knew her as Nellie, but legally she had to go by the name of Annie. And my grandparents, my grandfather's name was Albert Tuhawk. He was 14 years older, 12 to 14 years older than my grandmother. And it was my grandmother's mother, my great grandmother, who arranged the marriage, because he wanted my grandmother to have a protector because she owned a lot of land and she knew people would want that land and would do anything to get it. So she had always been impressed by my grandfather as a man, as a young man. So although they knew of one another, my grandparents really didn't meet and eye to eye and really didn't speak to each other until the day they were married. And interestingly, they were married for 55 years. They were married in 1920, and they were married for 55 years until my grandfather died in 1975. So that's where I come from. That's the basis of my identity as a human being, certainly, and certainly as a Lakota person. They were strong people, my grandparents, and that whole generation were very, very strong and resilient people. They had to be, because they were the second generation going through traumatic change. We Native people now, no matter what our tribe, don't know enough about what our parents and certainly our grandparents went through in those first days of assimilation, when the government came down really heavy-handed and did things like forbidding them to speak their own language. This was especially at the reservation, at the government boarding schools, as well as the parochial boarding schools. That was the number one rule. You did not speak your own language, and punishment was doled out if somebody broke that rule. And many people did break the rule in spite of the fact that they knew they were being punished. Talk about resilience. And it was those resistors and those who stood up for their culture by speaking their language. Those kind of people are the ones who are responsible for passing the language and the culture from one generation to the next. Otherwise, we probably would have lost more of the cultures, especially up north, than we have had to that point. So our grandparents and our great-grandparents certainly knew the meaning of resilience, because they had to be. There was no other choice. There was, as I said, life under the control of the federal government, the Indian Bureau, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and essentially of a lot of churches, mainly the Catholic Church, was not easy. because assimilation was in full swing. And the government's stated policy, and those of us who are Native know this, and if you don't, you should. So my apologies for telling you something you already know, but it's worth talking about, and it's worth knowing our history, especially in terms of that we're able to be resilient. The government's mantra for that period of time was to kill the Indian and save the man. In other words, the Indian part of us, the Native part of us, the indigenous part of us, our culture, our languages, our values, our rituals, all of that was to them no good. They didn't want us living by those values. They didn't want us practicing our spirituality. And so they did everything in their power to take those away from us. So you can understand why out of now we have 500 and some identifiable, more than that, identifiable Native tribes, indigenous tribes and groups. You can understand why out of that nearly 600, perhaps more, Native groups, that only about 160 of those groups still speak their native language. So the efforts of the federal government, the efforts of the Catholic Church and white missionaries in general did have an impact, unfortunately. But fortunately, there were enough people who remembered the ways, spoke the language, taught their children, and so forth. So I'm one of the lucky ones. I was born in 1945, and I grew up speaking the Lakota language. And unfortunately, I'm the last generation of first language speakers. There are that in a broad term. There are some of our children who know how to speak it, but not to the broad base that we did. So we're essentially the last, and as far as Lakota is concerned, probably the last first generation Lakota speakers, first language Lakota speakers. And the fact that there are Native cultures still existing in all of those tribes is a testimony to human resilience, and certainly a testimony to our specific resilience as individual indigenous tribes. And the reason I've been talking about this and sort of reminding us, those of us who know, is because of what's happening now. Globally, we're facing something that more or less happened, not the same illness, but happened on a similar scale back in 1917 and 18. Since then, nothing like this has happened. And I think the axiom, those who forget history are doomed to repeat it, is happening. Because even though historians and people who lived through it are trying to remind or teach the rest of us that this has happened before. And one of the sad stories back in 1918, the second wave of the influenza, because people got tired of isolating and people got tired of the restrictions that were put on them, and they decided to break free, as it were, and go out and mingle with others. And that gave the disease, the opportunity to come back in strength. And that second surge was what killed more people than the first. And maybe that's what's happening now. I hope not. I hope not. I just came back from South Dakota. And I had to travel, obviously, through Nebraska and Colorado. But I spent essentially the summer up in South Dakota listening to the news and sort of watching what was going on around relative to COVID-19. And the tribes were doing their best to prevent as many of their tribal members from catching the virus. they imposed restrictions. They set up roadblocks so that outsiders wouldn't come into the reservations, much to the anger of the governor of South Dakota and some of the people of South Dakota. She tried to take issue with the tribe's ability to protect themselves. And of course, in the end, she lost because she did not have the power to stop the tribes from setting up roadblocks. For a while, the isolation and the shutdown and those kind of things worked, but the tribes imposed the mask rule. And when I arrived up in South Dakota in June, the only people I saw wearing masks on the reservation and even off were Native people, were Lakota people. And other people, other non-Native people on the reservation were wearing masks. But once off the reservation, in the neighboring towns and in the rest of the state, where there were no reservations, no one was wearing masks. It's as if this coronavirus was not happening. And even though a few mayors, a few state leaders were trying to listen to science and suggest that people should wear masks, the governor was of the position that it imposed on individual freedoms. So, of course, now South Dakota or North Dakota are the states with the two highest incidents of more cases of COVID-19 because the political leadership is ignoring science. And once again, the only people wearing masks on reservations are the Native people, the Lakota people. And I think maybe that's because as Indigenous people, we have known hardships and we have not forgotten. The stories live on with us. Some stories are like it happened just yesterday, because in at least in my language of Lakota, there is no word for time. We do not have culturally the linear definition of time like Europeans do or the rest of the world does. We don't. There is no word for time. We have words for morning, evening, afternoon, night, and dawn, and sunset, and so on. But those are not words that denote time. Those are words that describe parts of a day. So, when we tell a story, we generally say, which means a long time ago. We acknowledge that things happened way back when. We don't say, 270 years ago or 1,000 years ago. We simply say there was in the past, sometime in the past. So when we tell stories, as I said, sometimes it feels like it happened just yesterday. So that's why when we tell stories of our culture and of hard times, we immediately connect with those stories because they have nothing to do with time. They have to do with the subject of the story. And most of those stories, a lot of the stories, the mythical stories, as some people call them, have morals to the story, have a point and teach something. But I'm going to tell one here in a bit before we end. But, the one thing that strikes me most of all, as someone who is part of what's happening now, who is a citizen of a tribe, who is a citizen of this country, and certainly a citizen of the world, like all of us are, I'm alarmed because a lot of people, and I don't know how many, I can't put numbers to it, I can't put percentages to it, a lot of people don't seem to care about our fellow human beings. Because putting on a mask is certainly a demonstration that we care about others. And we as Indigenous people care about others, because that was one of the basic values of our various cultures. We took care of one another. We cared about what happened to our families and their relatives and everybody else in the village and the community. We cared because we knew everybody else. We knew that whatever happened to them might happen to us, and that we were taught that we were part of the solution as well as we could be part of the problem. So having learned those values and having seen those values demonstrated in my childhood, more so than now, I'm appalled at how many people simply do not care for our fellow human beings. And hopefully we'll find some semblance of sensibility, and maybe enough of us will have enough sense to be resilient against all of the songs that we've been hearing, all of the misinformation, and do what's right for all of us. So that's my political stump speech for the moment. So I'm done, and I'm certainly will wait for the next segment. Thank you.
Thank you, Elder Joseph Marshall III. What powerful medicine. You know, if you enjoyed Joseph Marshall, please go to our website, IndigenousWays.org, and you'll see the full presentation that he has, as well as 100 other Indigenous, Native American, LGBTQIA, and deaf and hard of hearing presenters there. We're really excited now because our next presenter doesn't need any introducing. She is the co-founder of Tewa Women United, a nonprofit organization which is Native women run here in northern New Mexico. Elder Kathy Wan Povi Sanchez is from the San Ildefonso Pueblo here in New Mexico. She is very inspirational, as you will see in this presentation coming up, that she talks about the two-world harmony of the butterfly model. Her walk, her words addresses integrative wisdom and healing colonial traumas of the mind, body, heart, and spirit from a Native woman's lived perspective. So with that, please welcome Elder Kathy Wan Povi Sanchez.
All right. Well, I must don't want to have technology overrule us, but I am an elder and I'm going to try my PowerPoint. So I will share my presentation and my thoughts. And where do I see share on this list? Can everybody see that now? Oh, cool. Okay. So this butterfly model I'm going to share with you started as our life journey into asking, who am I? What am I doing? What is my purpose? And really trying to understand that transitioning from a native rooted person in our languaging, in our presence, in our centering, and Sangitamo, everybody, it was a beautiful way to begin our journey today with the blessings bestowed upon us, and also in all the reflective ways that Taz has said about our different ways we see things. And we are living today in a trauma-infused world, demanding our need to know. And we need to know other facets of terms that we can show in our expressive ways. We need to know sometimes it's taboo to really talk about traditional medicines or remedies or ceremony, but I think it's in that understanding of what English terminology does to our ways of knowing and thinking that we shouldn't allow that fear or the fright of sharing our soulfulness, our hope and our desires for things to come in a good way. So in thinking about that, I wanted to share different ways of who are we? And so really, what are other ways that we call ourselves besides just humans? So I'll give this explanation. We are multiversal, earth-centered, spirit-based, community, kindred beings. Really, we are two-legged relatives within the allness of earthen visions. We earthlings are outer visions of our ancestors who dreamt of our futuristic presence, the now. We are their hopes and joy that they have survived to guide us, protect us, nurture us as we lovingly care for our Earth Mother and all relatives. So truly, let us embrace the many different facets of knowing in our relations and our presence in this journey in a very trauma-infused world, but our ancestors have that hope in us to really guide us. So I shall continue. So dream a new dream. In the visionary dreaming two-world harmony, the butterfly model is about a holistic or realistic thinking of infinity into perpetuity. Did I say that? Represented in the totality of water. Sacred thoughts from our ancestors inform us water is life. Water can flow freely to keep loving energies cycling in life-sustaining infinity flows. We are earthen vessels who hold sacred water. We have the water messages in us. You all are as precious as a warm smile, splashing, playfully playing from one puddle to another. As elders would say, you are the breath of our hearts. All of you are very precious. So know your moment and know your reflective presence with water. Water is life. So dream a new dream. In this trauma-infused world, we can dream. We can hold on to our ancestral blessings upon us to guide us. So from the cosmic skies, the energy that is in our cloud sky people, the breath is there. The breath of life comes to us from billions and billions of light years away into the multiversal existence of that energy in us. We are those pillars that bring that beaming, that breath of life into us. So consider your gift of being present in the now. Enjoy it and be joyful and happy that you have that. I don't like the word resilience, but that constitute in us the energy to really not become what the trauma-infused world thinks we are living in. But we can dream and create our world of being in that soulful way. So the breath of life nurtures us. Let us protect that breath, that sky. So as the blessing prayer said at the beginning, and Tosh also mentioned that when we bring our mind, our hearts, and our spirit together, and that's the clouds that moisten us, that gives us our breath, the mist that's in the air, that breath of life reflects the rainbow of that presence of life, water, mist coming down, and it nurtures that little plant, the little tree of life that we are in the beginning. But we were joyful, we were happy, we were connected, we were protected. We had that tree of life, and now we want to look at the groundedness, what connects us, what roots us to live a good life. Even if we are in a trauma-infused world, we still can overlight it. We can light this space so that we have our soulfulness, shining that love beyond what they think is going to tear us, keep us down, but it won't. So if we're grounded and rooted in our languaging, and this language does not just mean Tewa or Spanish or English. Languaging means, how does our body communicate? How do we have our self-expressions? So they're like the lungs. So there's diversity of modalities. There's different reasoning in our capacity as humans, as earthlings. If we didn't embrace all those different definitions that I had given, the reasoning ability, if we stay within English, if we stay within what the outside tells us who we are only using 10% of our ability. Can you imagine how the reasoning ability we have when we speak with animals and plants and the blessings and the prayers, and recognize that we are earthen vessels, that we have the ability to reason things out? And take your time doing that. Don't be rushed into making decisions. You have that within you. As the other side of the wing is that spirituality, that spirit rootedness of our centering, insight centering from the heart. We are very worthy. We are full of the integrity of our presence. We have purposefulness. And don't be worried, but not all is known. So young people want to know everything. Did I do it right? What am I doing wrong? No, not all is known. So just take comfort in knowing that you're on a path. You're going to go zigzagging off and wandering, but your elders and your ancestors are really guiding you with that energy. They might bring a tree into your life as you're walking that will brush you and cleanse you or comfort you. Or a little animal might come by and just brings joy to you in knowing that there's life still here running around, and give love and thanks. So just comfort in knowing that we are so worthy of enjoying our presence with each other, even if it's at a distance at this time. Our minds are there with each other. Our soulful dreams are there with each other. Our grandmothers throughout the whole global world are having good thoughts for you, all our children on our Earth Mother, in our plant world. So two-world harmony starts from within, that transformative self becoming thought. So as we were talking about the dream space, our ancestors had thoughts and they had visions. And then how did they become thought? How do we hear their thoughts now? So this is a picture that shows all the elements that are there within waters, within Mother Earth, within the skies. Every vision that is here is a reflection of you. You guide and direct the visions that you want to see, that you want to be there. So know that you are within that capacity to really bring forward those dreams, those visions. We are earthen vessels. We are holding healing waters for loving culture of peace within us. as you see this water flowing, the rocks, the stumbling, but they create currency. They direct the flow. That's your journey. You have water within you, and drink plenty of water. Nourish yourself. When we get depressed or frustrated or thinking we're not able to understand, or that we're misunderstood, or that we're not loved, we tend to reach for other spirits to come into us. And that's where the alcohol and the drugs and the shaming, guilting all comes in. But remember, you can cleanse yourself. You can go towards water, drinking water, cleansing you, refreshing you, and crying. Water in you has to come out in tears at times, but it's recycled. It's returned back to Mother Earth to feed and to nourish us. And we do create visions like this pottery of the Avanyu, the water serpent. It goes from, like Elena said, Artash said, the 7 directions. And the prayer this morning that my sister Evelyn gave, the directions of that energy, you center it around and around the mountains, and then back into you, around you, below you, above you. And then you're walking in that happy, healthy way. Take that deep breath. So as we focus our energy, we're seeking truth. And this butterfly model with that light in the middle, that's your focus. When you're in meditation or in dream space, your ancestors are coming through you in connecting and letting you know what the past was like, how Mother Earth started. We have the capacity as earthlings, as humans, to journey back to the beginning of time. We can see it. There's people that are gifted to take us there. But then we also have the ability to drain into a new way to be if we're entangled in the misconceptions of what the culture of violence wants us to believe of who we are. So in seeking truth, that energy is let loose to journey our soulfulness when our body is at rest or we're in meditation. So don't be fearful. You have your life of who you are without that earthling, without the earth shell. It's only a vessel. Our bodies are only vessels to bring forward that journey from within outward. So times we let go, times we come back, times we journey to the next realms, but be in a presence of that lovingness, because that is the story, the life narrative that is going to be read to you when you meet Creator, when you meet another realm of your ancestors. They'll be glad to embrace you because they know your story. So be consciously aware how you're journeying in this life, the way you want to be happy, the way you want to be soulful. Never mind what the outside is trying to put on you. Just don't give them your breath. Don't give them your thoughts. Be honoring of who you are in your ancestral connective ways to our plant life, in our plant world, with allness in this earth that we have as our home. Mother Earth is sharing with us. So if you know what your values are, your culture, what is your culture of peace? Here are some values that we have been emulating and trying to live each day. We falter, we come back, but we know that, again, we also know the culture of violence has its core values as well. Do they align with yours, or do you hold on to being that loving, caring person in a culture of peace? So winataye in our language means like together we help each other. Reciprocity is there. Woatsi, means that in our life journey, being alive with that purposeful intentionality. What is our intention for today? Who are we helping, sharing, and being grateful and thankful in our moment at this time? And kuiwa sengwa victim. That means that within the spectrum of our soulful visions of who we are, our masculine way of being is present in our body. Our mothering ways of being is present, and they both are there to talk and communicate with each other. And so sharing and not separating ourselves from our soulful visions of being together. That is a really need and a desire for a continuum of that vision of how we relate to each other, how we work with each other, how we enjoy each other's presence, never mind what their life journey, their behaviors might have been, but you see that soulfulness in them. You rejoice when they're alive here with you to share and learn and be in that kind way. They give you the opportunity to be expressive of yourself. And don't be fearful, it's okay. I mean, we don't know all the answers, we're trying. So try different facets of that interpretation of who you are. So Nango Chukuyo is Mother Earth, living Tewa wombfulness. We are in a womb, we are on Mother Earth's sphere that is that global levels of existence in our earthly surroundings, from the cosmos to us, to Earth, to Mother Earth, into Mother Earth, and back again to be reconstituted. Oops. So in this slide, the 3 T's of culture. So in both sides, even as the culture of violence is trying to infuse and take over our minimizing, destroying, and genocide, trying to genocide our cultural presence. On both sides of us, the technology is there in our traditional indigenous ways. We have our methods and our means, thoughts. There's scientific technology that is trying to be scientifically expressed in theories and things, but we have our values and our beliefs. We have our thoughts. Guide and protect and nurture those thoughts that are connected to our whole different ways of knowingness of our lived narratives. Techniques that we think can only come from being in a scientific world. But techniques only means activities. How do you practice? How do you do your rituals? How do you do your daily activities? How do you do your presence? That's activities. That's your lived narratives. So you have strength in knowing and in saying that you're a match to, how would I say, not giving that breath away to a culture of violence. You know it. You know how wrong it feels. You know how angry it makes you feel, how shameful it makes you feel. Don't let that guidance of that loving caringness, and care and love yourself within your times. So your inner landscape from heart energy brings forward that mindfulness to shape that outer landscape. So let us in these 2 days also experience what it means to let go of some harsh images we have had of ourselves and our families or our upbringings and the suffering that has happened. We have that loving side of us that can heal us. So let the healing happen in ways that you probably didn't even think you could practice and do. And so we know the culture of violence. We know it it's infused or trying to steal our soul. It's very parasitical. It's very racist. It's a war economy. It's sexism. It wants to have the male dominance, recognize militarism, capitalism. All this we know is trying to infuse and come into our culture of peace. Don't let it. It's parasitical. It does not have life on its own, but it uses your energy. Don't give your energy away. Reclaim your energy to be that soulful, loving, caring person. And you'll be amazed how many of the ancestral guidance and peoples that are there in many different forms that will come and help you, come and guide you, come and be there with you. So if the weight of grief is not released, this picture shows how every cell in our body becomes holding that grief, and it's hard, it's heavy, and it leads to the water leaving because we're trying to think and be from the hardness. That rocks are very symbolic in that rocks transform. So even as you feel the sorrow of the weight that this rock image simulates, rocks can be foundations, they have energy in them to take the pain away from you and return it back to Mother Earth and be reprocessed and cleansed. So it's how your perception is. Just think of the many different ways you can see things. So somebody cue me in on time if I'm going way overboard.
It's perfect.
I'm still going good?
You're going beautifully.
Okay. So ecosystemic sustenance. In the butterfly model, we need information. We need our emotionals, our feelings to be with us. We need our life skills. We need to know what behavioral dispositions have a cultural place in us and not taken out of us and substituted with a culture of violence's behavioral ways they want us to be. They want us to be shameful. They want us to be guilty of something. They want us to let go and let them decide for us. Don't. You have your cultural ways. Your ecosystemic sustenance nurtures you, grounds you. Be creative and play. Let that vibrational energy of sound, movement, singing, enjoy it. Be with that joy and shake off that. And it's easily done by giving love and thanks. So simple. When your mind, your heart, and your spirit is together in giving love and thankfulness. It's like an indigenous precautionary principle that we are asking our mind body for that guidance, asking our heartfulness for that guidance, asking for spiritual connectivity for guidance. It's okay to ask. There's no shame in asking. And it takes time for you to receive that knowledge. It's okay. That's why we have lived narratives that say, oh, why I knew that. Why didn't I think about it? It comes in flashes, in those joyful moments, or in that letting go. So it's okay to be in that life journey, and we're in it all together. So as we heal ourselves, we heal our ancestors. Our ancestors have been demised. They were genocided. They were taken before their time. But we heal them as we heal ourselves because we allow that transformation of that energy to be shared in us, through us, for our children. And that is the prayer that we all share in. How do we transform for the future of our children? We are sacred, precious beings, lights, love that has been our ancestors, and receive it with that grace, with that goodness, and share it. It flows like water. It flows to feed our soulfulness. So in this butterfly model, the two sides come together, have faith and trust in our Creator's healing of that inner soul wounding. Ask for guidance, as not all is known, and we might not be ready for it to really sink in us, but it will be revealed in times when we're ready. So just be thankful for your moment, for moments are forever. Moments are here. Moments are now to be recorded into the life narratives, into the story of our presence. And as we cross over into other dimensions, like I said, it's our time on earth, and we transform and we return our earthen vessels, our earthen bodies, and our spirit journeys on. And we're greeted in that journey because they can see your life journey and what you have been trying to do, how earnestly you forgive yourself and love all those that are having a hard time. And you give them that permission to have that space to learn. You can't change anybody but yourself. So remember that you have to be emulating that energy that the Creator has given us, and don't let this trauma-infused world shape who you are. You have that from inside out. Honor that, protect that, guard it, and be with that in these 2 days of thinking and reflecting on all the many gifts that are going to be shared with you in these 2 days of our life journey together in this healing process, in the sharing process. So I'll end with that. And I thank all of you for being here and being in your truly purposeful presence. Good. Thank you. Oh.
Breathe that in. Breathe in that good medicine from Elder Kathy Wan Povi Sanchez. If you want to see more of her, she was our first presenter in the Wisdom Circle on the 1st of April 2020. So if you go to our website, IndigenousWays.org, and go back through the archives, you will be able to watch her in full, as well as the full length of the presentation she did at the Indigenous Healing Festival. So thank you, Elder Kathy, for that medicine. Thank you for your time in watching this video, and we'll look forward to seeing you this time next week. Same channel, same place, same time, with 2 more wonderful presenters from the Indigenous Healing Festival and also the IndigenousWays Virtual Events. Until then, stay safe, be well, and blessings to you, your family, until we meet again on this wonderful virtual circle.